All right, so back to today's top story, this dangerous heat. And first-year students at Rutgers University say they've been sleeping in the lounge of their dorm because there's no air conditioning.
News 12 New Jersey's Amanda Lee on campus talking with students tonight.
Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey, is one of the oldest colleges in the United States. However, despite being one of the best and biggest public universities in the entire country, Rutgers University has fallen behind on different aspects of student life. Many students at Rutgers rely on university housing, especially in their freshman year when living on campus is required. The first-year housing at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, has become increasingly hostile as global temperatures rise. The majority of first-year housing for students does not have any sort of temperature control. There is no thermostats and no AC units. These conditions make it harder for students to get an adequate amount of sleep to keep up with the demands of higher education and have complicated students' pre-existing health conditions. In addition to this, the heating is turned on in mid to late October and remains on until May 1st at the very latest. Many students over the years have complained to the university's residence life and maintenance department with varying degrees of success. In order to combat the temperature control issues with Rutgers University housing, the university needs to impose new heating and cooling policies that keep up with the rising global temperatures and climate change. In addition to this, they need to provide students with the resources to control the temperature within their dorms.
So these are two official Rutgers University emails that explain the procedure for turning the heat on and off. Because of the way that it's built, the heating requires 2 to 3 days to turn on and 5 to 7 days to fully turn off. The first one is from October 9th, 2024, and it says that there needs to be 3 consecutive days of 45 degrees or lower in order for the heat to be turned on. While the second one from April 23rd, 2025 says that there needs to be 3 consecutive days of 85 degrees or higher in order for the heat to be turned off, and that this will be done no earlier than April. So residents run into problems in both of these situations. In recent years, we've seen that heat waves extend further into the fall, but there's still periods of cold weather that results in the heat being turned on. However, the heat will usually never be turned off until the following April. This means that residents can experience artificially high heat as early as October. And in my experience, when the indoor heating is on and it's 50 degrees outside, it usually means that the room will be over 80 degrees. And because of the way that dorms trap heat, rooms with this type of heating system also run into excessive temperatures as early as March. And as you can see, they will not be resolved until at least April.
For anyone to survive in the Linton Towers, especially on the higher floors, for example, I live on the 8th floor, you really do need to buy your own fan. Probably 2. That was the best advice I could have gotten, as I realized, because as soon as I started living there, the ceiling fan that they had provided was not doing enough.
I remember in our residence hall group meet, there was a person who was asking if it was okay to sleep in the lounges because of how hot it was. Mm-hmm. I remember there was another person that had to sleep on the floor of their dorm with an ice pack.
Excessive heat has extremely negative effects for residents, including for those who do not originally have underlying health concerns. So your heart rate increases to bring cooler blood closer to the skin. And if this is kind of a prolonged situation, this can have long-term effects on cardiovascular health. This is also especially compounded when dorm elevators break down, which is not infrequently the case, and students have to take several flights of stairs to get to their rooms. Excessive sweat can also lead to dehydration and heat-induced acne, which is something that me and other residents in my building specifically experienced. In addition to physical health, studies show that high heat is associated with increased mental health emergencies. So not being able to sleep well in addition to that and staying in that hot room can only increase the pressure on students, rather than creating a relaxing environment where they can unwind after a day of classes and studying. Students kind of go back to this room where it's extremely hot and difficult to concentrate or rest.
Rutgers University, New Brunswick is unique because it comprises 5 separate campuses. These campuses were developed at different times, but the current residence halls were mainly built between 1960 and 1980. However, patterns begin to emerge when you compare the housing options on the different campuses. One of the most stark differences with freshman year residence halls is seen on Bush campus. One of the newer campuses, Bush campus, has 7 residence halls for first-year students, all of which have some form of temperature control, whether it be air conditioning or air cooling. This is the only campus where every residence hall for first-year students has some sort of temperature control. This is important when you consider the type of campus that Bush is. It is home to Rutgers' STEM programs. When considering the career outcomes of STEM students, many go on to get high-paying jobs and are therefore more likely to donate money back to the university. Now let's take a look at the Cook-Douglas residence halls. The Cook-Douglas campuses are home to the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, Mason Gross School of the Arts, and Douglas Women's College. Though younger than the College Avenue campus, it is one of the older campuses at Rutgers. Most of the residence halls were built in the 1960s, and the rooms are often small and cramped. The majority of these residence halls do not have any form of temperature control and have not been updated or modernized. The students that live in these residence halls are mostly students of Mason Gross School of the Arts and SEBS. While these schools provide an amazing education, the jobs in these fields don't pay as much when compared to STEM fields. Could this data suggest prioritization of STEM majors by the Rutgers University administration? Is Rutgers showing who they want to invest in and who they don't?
What does this show us about the state of climate change and heating? According to data from the National Centers for Environmental Information, average New Jersey temperatures have trended upwards since the 1950s. The average February to May temperature in 2024 has been 5 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the 50-year average from 1950 to 2000. Similarly, the average September to November temperature for 2024 is also around 4 degrees higher. So this shows that these heating and air cooling systems might have worked well during the 1950s and 1960s, maybe even the 70s and 80s, when many of these dorms were built and many of these regulations were created. This also explains the emphasis of having winter heating and the treatment of air conditioning as a luxury rather than something that also contributes to how habitable a building is. As we can see, though, these systems no longer make sense during the 2020s, both on an individual and environmental scale. We've talked about how student and tenant health can be negatively impacted by the heat and how leaving the heat on at all times wastes resources. But most importantly, these systems show the extent of climate change that's visible even on a local level. We can see how fall and spring, there were lower temperatures on average, so these systems might have made sense. But now we are in a very different age.
For many people in the United States, the effects of climate change seem to be a problem for the countries in the global south. This apathy towards climate change quickly changes once our modern comforts are stripped from us. For the students living in Rutgers housing, the effects of climate change hit close to home. The rising global temperatures become a real concern once you are stuck in an environment where you have no control. To fix this issue with Rutgers housing and temperature control, Rutgers needs to implement their own temperature control policies and guidelines. These policies would need to be updated on a regular basis in order to maintain comfortable living conditions inside of the dorms as climate change worsens. In addition to this, Rutgers should take the steps to implement air cooling technology into their residence halls. Even if an air conditioning system cannot be implemented into an entire building, a box air unit would provide some relief for students. Rutgers should also improve their communication with students. Many students have had terrible responses from Rutgers residence life or no-shows with maintenance. However, this does not solve the root of the problem and only provides a temporary solution. In order to fix these problems, actions need to be taken to address the effects of climate change. We need to invest in green and renewable technology, hold companies accountable, and pay reparations to those who were most affected by climate change.